Hey, my name is Matt Ballant, and welcome to my session on JSON parsing and the data window in PowerBuilder. And this session is part of Elevate 2021, brought to you by Appian. Just a quick disclaimer, all the views I will express during the course of this session are my own, do not necessarily reflect those of either Appian or my employer. Our agenda is fairly straightforward. We're just going to have a brief introduction and overview, and then we're going to dive right into code examples. Again, my name's Matt Ballant. Been using PowerBuilder since the middle 1990s. Worked at a variety of different corporations, large and small, a lot of time in healthcare, insurance, materials processing, public energy sector, that sort of thing. Currently work for Concentra, which is a healthcare provider. So what are we going to talk about here? Well, basically, what I want to do is go over some basic JSON parsing techniques and importing techniques that you can use to get data into data windows in PowerBuilder. This is nothing earth-shattering or advanced. It's not my intention to go through in really heavy detail a lot of these topics. So if you're already a guru, this probably isn't the session for you. The two main controls we're going to cover are the JSON parser and the JSON package. And our basic use case here is a JSON string. We have a customer and a quote, and the quote has 3 parts on it. So the JSON parser control, again, it gives you the ability to load JSON formatted data and then parse through that data to retrieve information, which could then be loaded into a data window. You can invoke this object directly in code, or you can create a non-visual object that has specific methods and constants or variables that you want to use throughout your organization or throughout the application you're coding in. Either way, it's pretty much the same. This is a list at the bottom here of some of the methods we're going to cover, primarily just loading data into the control, and then some of the ways you get the information out. Appian does not recommend you use this control with large amounts of data, and they define that either 20 megabytes or 100,000 rows. JSON package control is very similar. Again, it gives you the ability to load a JSON string and then parse through that information and pull out data. Same sort of caveat, you don't want to use this for large amounts of data. In the data window, we're going to be taking a look at importing the JSON, and there's 2 main methods to do that. So let's go on with our demo. Got PowerBuilder going here. Have an application here called JSON Parse. Let's run this guy. Okay, so it's very simple here. Here's this top level edit control. Here's got my base JSON in it. and I'm going to pull this out of here real quick, and we'll take a look at it in a separate application. Something you're going to always want to have if you start working with this is some other kind of JSON editor or parser or something of that nature that you can use to format and verify your data. For me, I'm just going to use Notepad++, which is probably my favorite editor, and it has a plugin, JSON viewer plugin, that's very helpful. So let me just pull this data in off of that window here. So here I go. That's all nice and handy there. That's why you want to have a formatter. So I'm going to show my viewer. So this is the first level of the data. I have my customer information, contact, that sort of thing. I have another node here called a quote. It's got one element. Here's my quote information. It's got this part, another element, and there's three parts in this particular quote. So one of the things that's nice about this is, number one, right, already my JSON's been verified that it works, because this viewer wouldn't come up. It would give an error if this was not properly formatted. Something I can also do with this plugin is I could format it here on the screen, and now it appears much nicer. It's all nicely indented, and all the values are very easy to look at and read. Okay, so that's my JSON. So let's go back to our PowerBuilder app. Okay, so here we have our quote right here. This is the quote information. This is the entire JSON at the top. The customer, quote, and the part. Right here we just have our quote. Down here we just have our part. So we've broken this up for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to use the JSON package. These are these are data windows here. I have a message data window at the top just to kind of give me information about what's going on as I run through this. So click on my package. Okay, so I got some information loaded in here. Okay, some other information loaded in here. This is my customer. This is my quote. No parts. Okay. If I look at my message, I can see that the package loaded it, imported it. Next level, loaded the quote. Failed to load JSON data because of its root node is not an object. Okay. Don't really know what that means, but one of the things I can do here is let's reset this. First thing I'm going to do, let's just make this a single element. So, okay. I got my part information. It's, a part number, a bunch of dimensions, units of measure on those dimensions, and a total count that's on this quote. Okay, so that's just a single thing, single one. See how that works. Hey, that works. Okay. So apparently there's some issue with my JSON array. Well, okay. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to go to Appion's data window reference. This is their online help. There we go. we're using this import JSON by key. Okay, and this is an example. Okay, we don't need to do a get child because I'm not doing any of that fancy stuff here. It's plain JSON. Okay, we got a little open bracket and a close bracket. That indicates an array in JSON parlance. Okay, in this particular department ID, a value, name, a value. Okay, department ID, a value, name, a value. Okay, this looks like a 4-element array of department IDs and the name. Okay, it's got the closing curly brace, got commas in between each one. Okay, and according to this, import JSON by key, and you get a row count out. Okay, so why isn't mine working? Well, I'm going to have to restart my app to get this data back, just to make sure that I have it correct. I can go into the open event of this window is where that information is set. Okay. Here we go. So here's my JSON. 3 parts. Okay. Looks good to me. There we go. We got it. Let's tell you what. Let's bring it into our handy dandy Notepad++. Okay. Paste it again. Got to close that and open it. There's an array of 3 elements, parts. Okay, looks good to me. Format it. Formats correctly. Okay. Don't know what the deal is, but and this error here failed to load because root node is not an object. Well, if that is the case, then why would this load? Well, let's look at our code. Let me make sure I'm using the same method. As you know, maybe I put in the wrong one. So here, click on this. What happens? Trigger an event. Package JSON. Okay. So our package JSON say. Okay. So here we go. We loaded our JSON at the beginning. There it went. Here's our quote. Took the value from the text box. Load string into the package. Excuse me. Got the JSON string back. Imported it by key into the data window. Everything's fine. Here's our part. Loaded it into a JSON package that we had called package part. Okay, here's where we, okay, there was no error loading that. Got our string back. And actually this string is exactly the same. What we sent in and what we get out is exactly the same. Import by key. Now what did they do? Was it import by key? Import JSON by key. Yes, I'm using the same method, but it's not working. Okay. Well, don't know why it's not working. So let's look at our other method. Let's go back to our application, run it again. This time we're going to parse this, and it's going to do something a little bit different. And what we're doing here, and this is all in this message up here. We'll go through these real quick. But it takes the JSON from our text box here, loads it, and then it goes through and it gives us the values out of it. It tells us that our key name is customer ID. What's the value? What is the type? It's a number. Create date. In this particular case, it's a string, even though I think in the data window it's set up as a date time, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to look at that. I don't recall. But this shows you the different kinds. And now when it got to that quote designator, so we have this here that designates this data element of their quote data, and it comes back and says that it's an array. Yes, and it is. Even though it only has one value, it is an array. So this was properly parsed. Let's go take a look at that code. That's in our parse JSON. So create our parser. We load the string. We say if we get any error, it gets reported, but we didn't have an error. And then we get the root item. So that's like the beginning of our data structure. And then we loop through it. You know, it wasn't null, or we would have had an error on our message. So we get the count of all of the child nodes in it, and we loop through each of these. We get the key value, and then we look at it to see, is it a string, is it a number, Boolean, and then we set our values that we end up inserting into our message line data window. So using these techniques, you can go through any JSON and pull out information about what is contained, and then you could use this to insert this data into any data window using a set item command, assuming that you had a data window with the proper columns and the proper data element to be able to put that information in. And if you wanted to get really fancy, you could create a recursive method that would go through and say if this is an array, then you would send that array string back through something similar to this and then look at it again. And if it has an array, you could go through it a third time, etc., to bring that information. But again, these series of these basic get item methods, you know, they sound and they remind me very much of the get item on a data window when you're pulling the data out of a data window. So let's go back to our package JSON just to kind of reiterate some of what we're doing here. We're taking our JSON, we're loading it into the package, and we're checking for errors. And then we can get the string back from that package. And then what we have to do is, in this particular case, our JSON had a comma double quote at the end that we had to strip out. And this is what I'm demonstrating, is in order to get this to break down your multi-level JSON, you're going to have to do it manually. At least that's the only way I could determine to get this to go. So my JSON had 3 levels. I had my customer level, my quote level and my part level. And what I had to do is break out each one out of the main JSON. So that's, you're going to need to know and play around with string manipulation. If you use a PFC, you use their string service to do this. Otherwise, you got to do whatever, a lot of pause commands and right, mid, left commands to pull pieces of the string out. So the initial part of this, I had to pull. Let me bring up the JSON. It makes more sense for me to show that. What I had to do initially is pull out everything up here. Oh, I didn't need that. I didn't need this quote part, but I had to pull this off of the JSON in order to load that into my data window. Now, it would be nice if you did a load item by key value into a data window, because it looks at these key values and then it inserts that into the data window in the proper place. The data window has to have a column with the same name in it. Now, it would be nice that should, and in my opinion, it should just ignore this, any section below this, because at this level, these are the only valid nodes. In my data window, I don't have an underscore quote column in it, so why is it even doing anything with that? Just like if I wanted to, I could add, and I'll demonstrate this real quick, I can add another node into here and it'll still import it. So let's run our app again real quick just to demonstrate this. Okay, so let's say I'm going to do it here in this quote portion. So I'm going to put okay, so I'm going to add a new element in here, Matt, and the value is good. Okay, so now, didn't have a problem. Oh, yes, it did. Didn't bring that in. What did it say? Missing a colon. Oh, did I do something wrong here? Ah, okay. I forgot to terminate the label. Okay. I gotta have everything in quotes. Well, this is in quotes because it's a string value. So let's try that again. We'll reset this. Yep, there we go. Okay. So using this import by ID method, my JSON string could have any other kind of garbage in it that I want. And it's only going to look at the ones that correspond to the data window object that I'm using. And so that being the case, I don't understand why it gets hung up on the fact that there's this quote attribute that happens to be an array. It should just skip that, because I don't have a quote element in my data window. But maybe that's a future enhancement or something. But anyway, at this point in time, you're going to have to cut and slice your data window information. I mean, you could kind of do the same thing here, I would guess. You could break this array. I had 3 rows. You could create a method that goes through and parses it and determines how many elements and then goes and adds one line at a time. But again, based on what they have in the help file, you shouldn't have to do that. So I don't know if that's a bug or not. I've reported some issues with the JSON, but none of them have been deemed a bug, so there must be some other kind of explanation for that. Okay, that's our demo. All of this was done in PB 2019 R3. And I'm going to provide an export of this small application so that anybody interested can duplicate it. So just as a recap, as we've seen, valid JSON doesn't always work in these controls. And the error messages are not particularly helpful. Help is not always helpful. And I know that Appian recommends you use the online help. In our case, the online help and the PowerBuilder help is exactly the same in this. This is the same example they give. I definitely recommend you download a decent text editor with JSON capabilities. You're going to need to polish up on your string manipulation. And one thing, though, I feel is when you finally get this going, it's much more flexible than the XML parsing is. It's a very robust tool and can really be helpful. And it's helping me in my current project quite a bit. Here's information about the Appian community. I don't think we're going to have Q&A.